Welcome to the 2023-24 School Budget Roundtable discussion. I'm Amanda Bergen, the district's communications coordinator. Today we have a group of community members along with our superintendent and our assistant superintendent for business here to talk about what's in the budget, what some of the challenges were for creating the budget, and discuss some of the issues that they have top of mind before we all go to vote on May 16th. Before we begin, let's start with some introductions from everybody on the panel. And Brian Schnapper, let's start with you.
Yeah, hi. Brian Schnapper representing the PTA.
Tom Newman representing the Somers Education Foundation.
Michael McBride representing Heritage Hills.
Anthony Sirico representing the Citizens Finance Committee. Presently Town's Councilman, and I did 6 years on the school board before that.
Chris Platania, Assistant Superintendent for Business and Operations here at Somers.
Ray Blanche, Superintendent of Schools.
All right, thanks everybody for being here. And Dr. Blanche, why don't you kick us off by talking about some of the challenges that existed in creating this year's budget?
Thank you, Amanda. One of the challenges I think not just the school districts have faced this year, but certainly our homes and our community, our own homes, is the significant increase of the CPI index for us and cost of everything going up. So our large areas include health insurance, area for our employees, also with our utilities, both fuel and electricity have exponentially jumped, and then just supply items, just copier paper and things like that, and cleaning supplies have jumped. Most of those have been double-digit numbers that have increased. So one of the areas that we continue to see is that we had anticipated or had hoped some of those would come down, but the COVID had caused us to stay out a little bit longer with those increases. So another area that continues to be challenging for us is just the ability for us to, as our target is to stay underneath our 2% cap that we're looking at from the state. So we're able to go ahead and do that again since the inception of the cap this year at a 1.97. And so one of the balancing pieces in there that has helped us, we have been getting a little smaller each year across the district, and so inside of there we are able to reduce our salary expenditures to approximately $500,000 for next year, because we do have a little bit smaller class at the high school, so we're able to reduce some staffing at the high school in particular, and that reduced our overall cost about $500,000. So that certainly assisted inside of there. Chris, anything else you can say specific to kind of the challenges inside of here?
No, I think you kind of highlighted the big buckets there. I know you mentioned utilities with the cost of that going up. This time last year, we were talking about our energy performance contract, which couldn't have come at a better time for us, as we were able to replace those old boilers and the lighting throughout the district, which will help drive our usage for our utilities down while costs are still going up. So we're not seeing the increase that we would have if we didn't do that project. So
yeah, I think we ballpark estimate where the new equipment came on board, basically cost neutral. If we didn't have the new equipment, even if we'd be using so many more units, kilowatt hours or gallons, we estimate probably around approximately $500,000 of more utility costs would have been here if we didn't do the energy performance contracts. So Chris saw it coming the whole way, so he jumped right on top of it. So that definitely was something we were pleased to see.
So I think maybe if you just describe the process. I'm on the Citizens Finance Committee. You go through a process with the town board in an iterative way, and then you bring in the community from various parts, right? And we're on the Citizens Finance Committee, and I know when we started this thing, it was going to be, the challenges that you were facing were well over 4 or 5%. And, we talked about that. Maybe you can just explain the process itself and how we got it where we are now.
Sure. With one of the key parts of the process is try to get as much input from staff, faculty, and community as much as possible. So throughout the year of help prioritize things that are of importance, and we want to make sure we do maintain and as if we need to make adjustments in some areas, we know that we're not hitting an area that's aligned directly to the district's mission work and is aligned to where the energy is going as far as the improvements and enhancements we're trying to make. And then we bring it down to a little tighter of a level at the board table. We'll go through initial sectioning. We'll look at non-instructional costs. We typically do that first, but a good couple of meetings on that, and that's basically all those elements that don't impact the classroom directly. So those utility costs, the health insurance costs, the costs for legal fees and costs like that, just supply costs. So we'll look at that, and then the next couple of meetings, we'll start looking at the instructional side. So looking at our staffing, looking at if we do have any folks who are retiring or perhaps resigning, moving to other areas. So we start looking at those numbers. And then, as I mentioned before, in this particular case, with those reductions in faculty, we were able to actually handle those through retirements through attrition. So we didn't have to bring anybody off of the current payroll list, I guess, and they're all here with us next year unless they kind of chose to retire or resign. And so a lot of an investment from the community makes an employee and vice versa. So we're glad we're able to maintain that, because again, that's just a loss of revenue or energy that you lose when you do that. And then as we work through in the subsequent pieces, we're still actually waiting for the state budget. It still has not passed as of yet or been approved. We don't anticipate there's going to be any significant changes to the district. One thing, though, it has happened, though, over since like the 2017-2018 school year, we have increased the percentage of the budget that the state has owned. And so the reality, we're about 3% higher now of the state overall owning the school district cost. Where it was before. Ballpark, that's about a $3 million difference coming from the state coffers proper since the 17-18 school year then right now. And that's been a piece that's been in the works many, many years. Since you mentioned, Tony, we were on the board about what was identified as the gap elimination piece there. There was a gap of the state funding so that every district had to kind of get less than what they were promised to. This will be the third year of it finally getting up to what the state funding would be. And you mentioned again, Tony, before our Board of Education, the Board of Education across the state, administrators, teachers have lobbied for that to be made whole. So that's kind of from the district level, school level, and actually at the state level, how we kind of work on putting the budget together.
Thank you for coming to the Heritage Hills Tenement meetings on Wednesday mornings, and you will be there a week from Wednesday, May 10th, and give you a little bit of a heads up of some of the concerns. One man continues to ask the same question about the purchase of the oil for the heating, the buildings, et cetera. And as Chris has so expeditiously provided me with in the past, paperwork and stuff showing that it comes off state contracts, that's one thing. So just be prepared for that question. Another thing that's a little bit more in the papers and a little bit more contentious is what is the salary multiplier for me in the state DOT, the cost of a person, including the workers' comp, and like for the teachers on the teacher's budget, the website, it's 11.60 that the Somers pays into the pension system, and then everybody pays, the employers pay the Social Security 6.2 and the 1.45 for Medicare. But on the budget side, the school board budget side, it groups together all of the workers' comp and the unemployment and the health and medical. Now, the multiplier with state DOT used to be 1.6, and that was 10 years ago. I've been retired 10 years from them now. And then when I was working private with the profit and overhead, the multiplier was 2.2. You can probably guess where some of this question is directed at. But I'm looking for the true cost of a certain individual to the budget of the Somers education system, Somers School Board. So are you familiar with what my question is, the multiplier, the cost multiplier?
Let me see if I have it. When I look at that, I think you've got a few of those cost multipliers that we would look at. The Social Security and the mandatory state retirement system for the employees is the ERS, or the teachers or the TRS. So those would be mandatory pieces. The other piece that I would say would be on the contractual side in those different bargaining units. So for we have a teacher's bargaining unit, and we have an administrator's bargaining unit, and then there's a support staff bargaining unit. And so they have a salary schedule for each one of the years that they've worked in the district. So if you're in year one, I'm a new employee, what is my schedule going to look like for me next year? That's different from each one of those units, and it's different from each year to year. So that depends upon each one of those areas. So typically those first steps are approximately 3.25% to 3.5%. Then they slow down at about step 10 to 12 to 2%, which is aligned pretty much with our CPI.
That's similar to the state with the hiring rate versus the job rate, but that's not the number I'm looking for. And I mean, if I had done the math and had a little bit more time, it did have the total cost, and I could just divide the total cost by the number of employees. And I had answered one of these school board candidates, I won't mention the names, but I had answered them back that for like construction, the workers' comp, the percentage is so much higher because it's so much more dangerous work. The unemployment is higher because it's seasonal type work. But the health benefits probably is about $6,000 a year for a teacher and for a construction worker also. It's the multiplier that's applied to the salary. For instance, my salary is $100,000, just say for rough numbers. The state would charge somebody else if I had to go out and solve a problem or submit explanations back to FEMA after Hurricane Sandy, Superstorm Sandy, or Irene. My expenses had to be recouped from the FEMA, the federal government. And I'm just looking for the multiplier. I don't want to belabor this too much and have another question about electric vehicles later.
Yeah, I think it would also depend on the specific person, because if you're talking about including health insurance costs, which is very large, some of them don't take the health insurance. So you need to look at it on an individual basis as well.
But just to take that from a budgetary point of view, those elements of insurance, health care, pension contributions, probably over 10% increases, and they're out of your control in a sense that you might be able to, well, pensions, what? You have to rely on the state.
That, yeah.
What is it? How much is it of an increase roughly have you had to absorb this year?
So between TRS, which is the teacher's retirement system, and ERS, which is the employee retirement system for all kind of non-certified staff, the increase was very minimal actually, because the teacher's retirement system actually went down slightly, and then the employee's retirement system went up a little bit more, but there's more people and larger amount that's attributed to the teacher's retirement system. So it was a minimal increase this year.
Okay, well that's...
And like you said, with health insurance, we're looking at 13 to 16%
Exactly.
of what that's gone up.
That's
So,
what I was going for, yeah.
Yeah, that was, I think, about a $1.6 million of the overall increase of the budget was just saying hello to health insurance next year.
So, you know, on the Finance Committee, the challenge was those were examples of inflation being well over 8%, and every organization is dealing with that across the, across business and other municipalities and school districts as well. And so the challenge is to get something to deliver to the taxpayer that is affordable and is sensitive to what they're dealing with in the community. People are out of work, their costs are going up, your insurance costs and your utility costs and all of that. The challenge is getting that and 8% to something. What is the tax rate going to go up in this budget?
Estimated tax rate's about 1.97.
1.97.
Okay.
I watched the video.
There you go. So okay, well, that's.
Yeah.
That's sort of the path that we went through in the Finance Committee to get us to a point where, we think we have something that's presentable and that the community can buy into.
As a parent of a student who benefited greatly from UPK this past year, glad to hear that that's going to increase next year. Curious as to what the longer term strategy is there in terms of funding that program. When will it become available to everyone, and will that eventually kind of land within the school budget?
So there's one of the pieces that we're looking to come from the state right now is where they're going to land with the UPK. Our understanding is there's more interest at a state level to have more kids across the state of New York go ahead and get the universal pre-K. We had not historically been able to access those funds because of the demographics of the district and the funding there. And so when that came available to maybe just 24 months ago, we jumped on it. And that last year was the first year when we got a part of that started and got that going. Then this year we were able to put 2 sections in there, and then we've got a little bit more funding. So now next year we'll be putting 4. For the district proper, that 4 is going to be pretty much where we have physical space left right now. Again, using our physical space when we had a little bit more sections at Primrose, now we have left, turn that over and use those as UPK classrooms. So that'll get us to what we anticipate about half of our future kindergarten students. We'll have about 84, and then about 170 or so kids right now is where we're landing. So that takes us to half. Very interested to see what the state's going to say as far as will they actually continue to generate more per pupil funds back to the school. it will place us in a situation where in 2 years from now, we anticipate asking for the next school district bond as we're bringing off the bond that built the addition to this campus, built the turf fields at the high school and the gymnasium at the high school and other wing at the high school. So all that mortgage is coming off. So a desire is to keep it kind of cost neutral. So now we can go back in and really work on the inside of the building. And we may be challenged to say, oh, should we be looking at the ability to add a few more classrooms at, Primrose, which would allow us to say, oh, if the state then generates the revenue, now we actually have space. What we're seeing in the UPK that we have, we've been able to have it be in our schools proper. So the children's experience of going to the gymnasium and going to the SEF this week and last week had the Whiz Fit Day, and so the little guys go and get to see that. So they're part of the social fabric. They get to use the library and all those learning spaces and the special visitors that come and things. So we're about halfway as the amount of space we need. That would be a very challenging question for us to think about. Is that something the community desires to do? Saying, okay, we are going to put some more physical space out there so we can actually get it, especially if the state says, look, if you got a kid in the UPK, we'll give you this money, and you got to physically be able to drive the space. So that's a question that certainly will tell us a little bit, hopefully in the coming weeks, even though it's a month delayed with the budget, to where we're going to go with that next one.
So universal pre-K is not funded by the real estate tax levy. It's funded by...
It's funded by the state, so the state
in its entirety.
Its entirety, yeah. Some districts do subsidize that. In other ways, we have a strong partnership with our YMCA, and we're using our district facilities. We're already heating them, we're already cooling them, we're already lighting them. So the reality is we're able to make that work for both the school district and the family and the kids. So that is a cost-neutral part where, again, the state does pay for that. Right now, it's 50% of our future kindergarten classes.
Just kind of walking around town, it just seems like there's more demand than there's availability. It's a lottery. How do you handle that?
So the state determines it is a 100% lottery. That's a state determination. So all the names are put in there. Here's the date. You say express your interest, and then that's generated by kind of artificial intelligence lottery, and we just generate that around and grab the first 84. And then there's a period, say, let us know by this date. And if there's folks have been reminded a couple of times, I changed my mind. We always get a few folks who now get it the second time around. We'll just run that lottery again and get those folks in a lottery. We did have about 125 requests for the 84 seats we have, just to see where the volume of at least initial interest of, hey, I'd love to be a part of universal pre-K. We've got 125 out of what we predict as a class, about 170. So
I was just going to ask that question. What's the 170? That's the
ballpark
total,
what we see from live birth rates coming.
The eligible population?
That's what we anticipate coming, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's no impositions of you got to pick so-and-so. And I pulled this stuff out of, at the Yonkers Board of Education when my son was young. I pulled it out of, and
it is a proverbial hat like that now. It's just digital. Yeah.
Well, it was like the bingo thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
I'd like to ask about the education side a little bit more than the finance side, which about as we've emerged from COVID, thankfully. Yeah. We talked about, I don't want to call it regression, but some special needs for kids as the learning environment was very different for the last couple of years. And can you talk about the supports that are in place now to sort of help out with kids who are maybe a little behind?
Sure. And I'm going to take that from a few different ways, if that's all right. So one, I would take it from the affective piece to start with. These are some students, depending upon where they were in the system during that time. They could be at the high school today, frankly missing a very different type of experience at the middle school of figuring out friends and how to connect and how to behave, how to check their own behavior. So those are pieces that we've continued to see. This middle school campus with those kids are at SIS during that, when you're with a classroom teacher all day long, those teachers have a gift of constantly just checking in all the way with the kids from the social emotional check-ins. So something happened in the morning, they could address it midday or end of the day. It's not like, oh, I don't see it till tomorrow, the next period. It's like, no, so a lot of those kids missed that for 3 years of that experience. And then the physical distancing and all those things. And then the Primrose kids, the same thing as well, just missing some of those parts. So from an affective piece, we've continued to look at our counselors at our schools, as well as our social workers, bringing on more student support groups, small groups in essence, and like, friendship groups in those areas, K through 12. And so that's been helpful for us to start looking at that more directly. Our high school has gone back to what was identified as their community lunch. And so that's the whole school kind of takes a break in the middle of the day. So what we were saying before, sometimes kids were like pressing themselves so hard. It's all staff, all kids are off during the day. And so we've actually seen some of our just disciplinary pieces kind of slide back down. You had three periods. You was like, you ate at like 9:30 or something, so it was hectic. So now it's been very helpful. And we are also making some adjustments for next year with our wellness team as well too. So the high school continues to get a little smaller. They're looking at creating smaller teams. So let's say if we were a team, we're able to support a group of children. That's like who we own. They have another team like us. They support half of the school. So really trying to create as much of a strong personal relationship with the kids to kids and adults to kids. So that's a piece that we've been looking at. So if kids are mentally prepared to be there, then we can get them there. We did see our attendance drop, certainly after COVID, when kids were used to maybe at the high school in particular, here a day, there a day, kind of back and forth, because that's what you do. They're like, yeah, it's okay, I can just stay at home. So we definitely saw our number of unexcused absences pick up. So the team has been doing a full court press on that with connecting with the kids and following up with them directly and getting them in school. And then from the academic side, one of the pieces we were able to do this year, we see our mathematics scores kind of buoying back up to what I would just say pre-COVID. Those numbers seem to be there and getting back to what we would anticipate. It's some of the areas in particular in those middle grades, that kind of 3 through 8 band right now, that we are seeing some of our reading pieces not getting back to what we would say are pre-COVID numbers, where we'll always have some students who will need additional supports to find the best success. We are just seeing more students who need some support. So we were able to go ahead, and one of the reductions at the high school, one of those FTEs, we were to reallocate an FTE at the elementary. So we have brought on more reading support for the middle school, elementary level. This program is particularly called Orton Gillingham, so it helps with really students who really need some one-on-one or two-on intensive work. And we have middle-sized groups that are there, as well as classroom instruction. So, and then continuing with our investment on our professional learning staff, getting training on reading in particular is where we're focused in on right now. That's the area that we see as the most needy in that regard.
I would imagine also that, as we were talking about before, that the enrollment's falling off a little bit, the ratios start getting a little bit better than they were. That probably is helpful in that regard as well. If you don't have people retiring, that you have additional staff.
So that's a piece where we've been able, I believe have always had pretty good ratios of student ratios and things. So you're depending upon what grade level you're talking, a 21 to 22 to 1 ratio. We've been able to manage and keep those the same. We will see a little bit of a here and there, and then sometimes the other numbers may float up a little bit because we get smaller. But one of the ratio pieces that we do see is, in particular, like with our youngest kids, with our kindergarten kids, if we can keep those numbers a little small, and those classrooms still do have a teaching assistant in with the kindergarten kids. They're the 4.5, 5-year-olds again. When this was happening, there's a lot of stuff going on in people's homes, trying to get things together, doing work from home, and the little 2-year-old there trying to learn language and stuff. So we're seeing that. We did see some pretty strong responses from the UPK program that we talked about before. Our kindergarten teachers are seeing that and partnering up with those teachers as well too. So we're on the same page, kind of getting that piece going forward. Sure. Yeah, Mike.
In regards to the special needs, I've spoken to the folks that, hey, you're going to have to pay now to get them trained and acclimated to socialization and living on their own or with minimal help as possible. I believe it was about $5 million that was in the budget. I'm not sure the exact number. But there's a couple differences, very heated differences of opinion amongst the group that I think that same question was asked at your last visit, and one of the guys sent in an email that he carbon copied me on. So I would love if at some point you could ask somebody to come over and speak to the men's club over in Heritage Hills. And by the men's club, it's everybody in Heritage Hills. Every adult in Heritage Hills is invited. But again, it's like, hey, we have to do this. And, it's one guy, I don't want to say too much because you'll experience it again next week on your visit, but just, hey, we have to take care of people.
Yeah, and frankly, I would say that I am, and I believe our board is, and our teachers are very proud of our special education area. I would say that one of the things that we do well is care about kids, any kid, anywhere where they're needed. So we have students that are in need of some support, OT or speech and things like that, and other students who need it more. So it's really driven, like you were saying before, Chris, on an individual basis of what does that child need to find success to be the best person they can be. And I couldn't be more proud of our administrative staff as well as our teaching staff of really taking the time to learn as much as they can about every child and seeing what we're looking at. And so one of the things we've slowly started to see move up a little bit, but at the high school, some of the open opportunities for some of our advanced coursework has opened up and removed some of the gateways that would kind of artificially be there. And so we've seen some of our numbers start to buoy a little bit more. If a student has support needs, it does not mean he or she shouldn't be able to find success at whatever we put in front of them. It's just they may need more support. And this whole idea about, in the past, you would say that maybe the six of up here, the reality is the time we would maybe went in whatever class we were in, maybe we were learning, I was talking to my son the other day, he was changing his brakes on his old Jeep, and we were talking about pressing the rotors out and stuff. So he was doing that. So, okay, he got that pretty quick, but the reality is somebody else may need more time. More time, more adults, more people, that's going to take funding to do that. Yet the end result is everybody needs to get to that learning space for them. So we're not all built the same, and we all need different resources. And we have, I think, again, just a stellar staff here, and we are able to show and demonstrate that our kids are doing well. Even when you look at our students who go off to the college level and choose to decide that, the number of students, the percentage that go who have an IEP or special needs is pretty darn high. And what's really great is the kids who go back to that school the second year is as high as anything else. So they're identifying how they support, and they're sticking. So that, to me, is a reflection of the families and the staff and a school connecting them to the right next step for them. So that, to me, is, again, one nice piece about it. It doesn't end here at grade 12. It's like, what's your next success? And they'll go off on to school. And again, if they choose to go to college, they're staying in the college and they're finding success. So.
Those are all great questions from a budgetary point of view, but maybe you can talk about the process of the IEAP and the state regulatory requirements you have to deliver service. You're always trying to decide how to do it and optimize it, which always becomes a debate, but I think you're doing a great job. The thing is, though, you have IEAP requirements and you have to add state regulatory agencies to deliver those services. Maybe you can talk a little bit about how that happens.
Sure, that depends upon where a student would come on board at elementary, middle, or high school level, because a student could present with needing support for their learning along the way for a myriad of different reasons.
But a teacher would identify it,
Yep.
A parent would identify
Correct.
it, and then come to you. Okay.
Yeah. And or it could be a medical professional, because there could be something medically could have happened along the way. The student now needs some support. So it can and does happen anywhere along that system. So it is a group. I like to describe it. So it's the family, the school, family supports, and look, we're coming together, and we're a committee that meets regarding a student who may need special education services. And they have an annual meeting that they meet every year. They establish goals and expectations and resources that are needed. And our special education team is doing that right now. And that's a pretty heavy piece of their spring when they go through it. And every student goes through it and say, okay, we've grown, or hopefully we've grown, maybe we've exceeded, maybe we need to work some areas. Now what's our next step?
How much of that is discretionary versus mandatory, and how you deliver that service?
Yeah, the discretionary piece really comes to the Committee on Special Education. I mean, so if a child is showing that they have evidence that says they need support in reading, let's say, then that is a support we need to give in reading. And then you're looking at what kind of ratio that the students may be in. Are they in a push-in class or a co-taught class? Are they in a class where the very intensive life skills and needs, and that's a different service delivery model that's there. So there's a whole spectrum of services that our children will receive. Ballpark, again, these are ballpark numbers. 1 in 5 children in Somers will receive some type of special services support. And so again, it could OTs, PT, speech, whatever it may be, related services, reading services, math services. It can be all kinds of heavy life skill services. And so it's a wide spectrum, but a significant portion of our children receive that. And I would say it's definitely appropriate what they need. And we see that that continues. And we do have some students at their younger levels that may or may not need those services, or they may kind of come down a little bit and say, instead of getting 4 times a week, I just need it 1 time a week for a check-in. And that's the piece of the magic those teams do. They just connect with those kids all the time.
But in the most severe cases, you might even have to keep kids funded at well over 18 years old, right?
21 would be by the state, right? Yep.
21's the cutoff.
Yep.
So.
And then for us, there are sometimes too, when we don't have the physical program here, therapeutic swimming pool and things like that. So some students with that level of intense need support would be placed into another school district around us or a BOCES around us where they've got that level of medical and physical kind of space that we just don't have.
Has Chris looked into how much a swimming pool would cost? There's 5 pools in Heritage Hills, and people always want one of the pools covered. I would be strongly in support of getting a swimming pool in the Somers school system.
Indoor pool.
I'm sorry, indoor pool. Thank you.
Well, we tell the freshmen it's always on the 3rd floor of the high school.
You had, in the past over at Heritage, you had explained the ranking in statewide school counts, and that a large percentage, and I might be paraphrasing a little bit, are AP students, so then their scores don't really count into the rankings. Did I get that right?
It depends upon who's ranking what, honestly, and when you look at that, part of the Regent scores, we had a particular where when children took Regents in this campus in the middle school, it didn't count at the high school level because those rankings were just looking at the high school level. In most particular, the last rankings that came out last year, they actually went all the way back to 17-18. 18-19 school year and kind of average those numbers because nobody had anything for 19-20. So I'm not sure what's going to come forward, but one of the things that we've tried to do more directly internally is demonstrate that right now, for example, we have 72%, I think, of our children in 12th grade took at least one advanced placement or IB course while they're with us. And so that number has significantly grown over the last few years, and it will continue to grow. Kids who some take 2 and 3 courses, or we have dual enrollment classes as well. So you can take a course here, get collegiate credit for that, maybe in a university. We have a Syracuse University group with our public affairs kind of group and things. And so really looking at those numbers as we see, our desire is to have more students take more of this advanced coursework. Project Lead the Way is a new course that we brought on forth a few years ago that has an introduction to biomedical sciences and pre-engineering. And so those courses actually are at the Rochester Technology Institute. They can get credit there. That's not going to show up on any report. The fact of the matter is a dual enroll class, these kids can get college ready. RTI is a pretty good school. and so that's a piece where it depends upon where those numbers look. I frankly am curious of what they're going to do recently because, again, in 1920, we didn't take any tests. In 2021, you had a choice to take those tests, and if you had a choice, I can tell you our participation was very low to take those tests in the Regents. I think it was 0-1 of the courses. You could get a Regents exam by not taking the test because, again, we're masked and separate and all those things. So last spring was really the first time we kind of got back to our norms. So, yeah.
Have you been requested at all about electric school buses and the doubling of the cost that it costs for a school bus? And are you familiar at all with the American Society of Civil Engineers study of the MTA in New York City? And ASCE has embraced the climate change stuff, even though some older engineers might have different attitudes. In their thing, that was just in last month's edition of their monthly magazine, it was the MTA buses are almost double the weight because of the battery. So some of the supposed cost savings, et cetera, are not there. And unfortunately with the MTA, they're not getting, they're getting charged peak demand charges, et cetera.
Sure.
So it's when I took over Northern Westchester in '97, one of the things I had to do, as in my position, was study Interstate 78 when there was a huge snowstorm and there were miles and miles of trucks and vehicles stuck for 5 days out there. So that is a fear that I have, that guys returning or gals returning from a swim meet, that some are visiting some college out in Pennsylvania or New Jersey or anywhere for that matter that's 50 miles away. I got stuck on a bus coming back from West Point for about 10 hours. So there's a lot of issues.
A lot of open questions for that. We're hearing from the state legislation that where there's some expectations that new buses purchased, I think it was a 2027 was anticipated to be electric. So that's not our choice. I would be very surprised if that doesn't change. Everything I've heard and looked at is there's not even a way that you'd have that many buses available to be on the road at that point in time, let alone our charging station, even if we can get the ability to get those charging situations all set up. Some schools may or may not have such a backbone and such infrastructure and things. So I don't think, my opinion, I don't think 2027 is realistic for that to take place. And so we'll kind of have to wait and see where the state drives that, pardon the pun, with us on that one. So,
And some of that charging stations and infrastructure upgrades that we would have to do for that could be part of the bond project that we're looking at asking the voters in a couple of years.
and as you know all well, living in the Northeast, a little colder, that the batteries don't do as well here.
Correct.
As well. So we will see what. Sounds like a lovely idea, just not seeing by 2027 without some other things to work through.
One of the questions I always get is, the IBM PepsiCo and how you're managing the risk of tax tertiaries could be very expensive. You seem to have done this year. Maybe you can explain how you feel you're situated. And you've done some, and you're delivering a budget that's under 2%.
So I think this year we're still waiting for the previous IBM property to be resolved there.
Okay.
And so we do have about $4.5 million in reserves available. So when and if we do need to kind of reimburse or get back that tax surcharge, we'll have that there. And we'll be able to go ahead and save some more funds over the next 2 to 3 years if we need to. So that will allow us to do that, much like we did with the Pepsi property roughly at this time, I guess, 2 years ago, that was resolved and we went ahead and made back the whole, which is not always the case. Many districts, that is one case where at the board table, a board could say, oh, look, we need to pay $2.5 million back to this entity, we're just going to bond it. And we'll bond it and we'll pay for it and we'll do the interest. Our tact has been to go ahead and save funds for that, a specific fund on the side. So when we pay that $2.5 million, it's out of our savings account intended for that purpose. And this is what we're doing, the same piece here. So if you add those two together and roughly round it up to $10 million, that's $10 million less. You're not paying interest rate on a 15-year bond or something. So again, it's trying to be smart about getting ahead of those things. And we use that as one of our elements always inside the budget with our general revenue and in that area. And then we have our different accounts where we're looking at capital reserve accounts, the 4% we keep for emergency accounts basically, and then the tax surcharge matters that we keep inside of there based upon what we're working with the town as a lovely partner. Hey, here's where we're seeing, and this is where we think it is today, Ray, and here's where it looks like it's going to go in the future. So we're able to manage that each year back and forth.
So although we're talking about a budget today, this is sort of a multi-year process and
Yes.
a strategy.
Yeah.
And within these increases, you're setting money aside to create reserve for
Yes.
potential risks that may materialize at some place in the future.
Yeah, one of the reserves you're making me think about is on the ballot. There's a second question on the ballot for reserves this year. So last year, the community allowed us to establish a reserve for facilities, in this case, particular athletic facility upgrades. And so what we're able to do there is set that account out. We have $7 million in that account now saved for the sole purpose of enhancing and updating the athletic facilities at the high school in particular. That allows us once again to avoid any interest on any loans or anything like that. So that project is going to include actually the baseball field where it is now, of going to a full synthetic field, new fence and the scoreboard and dugout and things like that, or pitching areas and things. And then the softball, which you've met as softball, it's in need of being updated in parallel with our baseball. So that was behind at Primrose. So that again will be permanent fence and synthetic field and having a scoreboard there. That actually is going to be very helpful for Primrose because they can use that during the day for their outdoor playground, because the day today it's kind of sloppy and messy. They don't want to play on the pavement. You can go right out to the turf and just, kids can play recess as well as physical education. So that's an added value for that one for sure. And then the third piece is we're excited about bringing actually tennis onto the school proper. So we're putting 6 tennis courts down at the lower grass, if you've been down there. Now that becomes part of our physical education program, where we don't teach tennis because we don't have tennis courts. So they can have physical education program now for all kids at the high school as part of one of their units in physical education. And then our tennis team, boys and girls, will be able to play there on site as well too. So that'll help immensely, frankly, just from a safety and security, because that's where our trainers after school. We've got access to the different the restrooms and just everything that's there. If we need the trainer right away, we can get there. And so ease of access for utilities and for the road to get able to get to a road if we need to and stuff. So that helps in a lot of ways with that. So that project we'll ask this spring. Hopefully it's up to the state right now and we'll get approval, and late summer, early fall, we'll shovel in dirt and kind of start moving
Yes,
from
and
there.
ask what the timeline looks like for that. Is that something that would all be in next school year, or is that?
Well, I really would like for it to be. We're going to be at the mercy a little bit, but our architects are confident we can get started early enough, and if we have a mild year like this winter, when I talked to them in January, they're like, look, Ray, we're putting down artificial turf next week. And so, if you can get there, they can pretty much work that around those years. Fortunately, we have some grading work, but our fields are flat, our fields are there, so it's not a lot of, earth movement that we've got to do just to kind of strip the grass off, get it ready, and get it set to do those 3 areas and stuff, so. Yeah.
The tennis courts, you'll have savings on not needing the buses to transport the students over there. I'm in Reese Park frequently with my grandchildren. I see those buses. I'm like,
every little bit helps, absolutely. And then we hope to actually bring in tennis for the modified program here at the middle school, because now we already have an after-school bus running between the schools. So you just get on the bus, go to practice, and so that'll be something we hope to bring added value to the children here at the middle school, or they can go ahead and start playing tennis at a much earlier age.
if you change from the pervious surfaces of the different fields to impervious surfaces, you're going to have to do different things as far as retention and treatment of the additional drainage water. But there are a lot of ways to do that.
Yes, and that's what's nice. They have that plan out now and already to the state, looking for approval and stuff. So we had a project manager, and then we just were informed we got a new project manager. So I hope that doesn't slow us up, but we'll see. We'll see.
On the video that Amanda sent over to me, they talk about the increases, and they talk about the 1.297%. They talk about the average a homeowner, and they also talk about condo and townhouse. And I believe it was $70 was the increase to a typical condo townhouse. Do you recall it all, Chris?
For the annual.
Annual, yeah, condo.
Yeah, for the annual, yes.
$6 or $7 a month.
Okay.
Yep.
So that's what I've been telling the guys, and I admitted to them, hey, I'm in favor of this.
Yep.
And I'm going to the pool next.
Maybe we'll get it if we get the UPK space in there. Get it. Well, I can't thank you enough for coming tonight. And again, always come with good questions and good thoughts. And my desire, my hope is again, that the community sees that we didn't talk about it much tonight, but over the last 5 years, that levy, the amount we've talked about, the tax rate, like at 197, there's about $650,000 this year that are underneath the 2% cap that we're not asking for. Because right now we're like, look, we can do it with this, and so we're doing it. And over the last 5 years, we've saved about $2.6 million that we could have got with it at 2%, and said we don't have to have it. Again, with the community being so helpful and all along say, look, if you don't need it, don't ask for it, and we didn't. And so that's like $2.6 million now every year in perpetuity. And so the reality is that if we'll need it, we'll do that. And we in that kind of middle of COVID, we actually didn't, because a lot of transportation wasn't there. It's like, oh, okay, then let's really bring that back down. That was over $1 million less that we did not levy or raise the taxes for that year. So again, we're here this year about $650,000 less than would have been at the 2%, simple majority, and we work to fall underneath that. And so we're going to continue that each year. Just start with where we're at. What's the most important pieces? For example, next year we're going to go at our next step of bringing world language into 5th grade. So last year we did 3rd and 4th. Next year is 5th grade. Well, how do you do that? High school's getting a little smaller. We got a person who's going to be half time at the high school and half time over here. So it's like, if we're like, hey, we weren't going to do that, yes, some of those things would have dropped even more. The reality is that hopefully we're balancing both. We're reducing by $500,000 and we're repurposing some of the FTEs. So people are like, oh, wow, now you got world language in 5th grade. Totally something new and different experience and things. So just an example. So, thanks, everybody. Appreciate it again.
Thank you.
And that concludes our 2023-24 school budget roundtable discussion. Thank you so much for watching. And don't forget to vote on Tuesday, May 16th at the middle school gym. You can go anytime between 7 a.m. and 9 p.m. You'll be voting on Proposition 1, Proposition 2, and also the school board trustee election.